You're listening to Never Heard of It, a Night Shift Radio production.
I learned a valuable lesson today.
Yeah.
That when a recipe says to put a bunch of ingredients in a food processor,
Sure.
especially when it's a mix of dry and wet ingredients,
Yeah.
the blender is not an acceptable substitute. Just take your chances mixing by hand.
Oh, why? What happens? It's just pureed it too much, and
No, it just gummed all up, and the blades could spin, but the food wouldn't move. And I've got the weird plastic dildo thing that you use to shove the ingredients down into the blades that comes with the blender.
Yep.
And I was it wouldn't reach far enough down with the lid on, because you stick it through the lid. So I took the lid off and I was poking it. Of course, it doesn't like to make contact with the blades. I was like, so I ended up just kind of stirring it and then using that thing is hollow on one side. So I just scooped it out like an ice cream scoop, and I was making crispy quinoa cakes.
Oh.
So I had to so I scoop them all out and make them into little patties and put them in the oil.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure that quinoa probably just was like, nope, we're blocking everything.
It was hot, freshly cooked quinoa, and then breadcrumbs and this flaxseed water mixture and shallots and garlic. So it was this mix of wet and dry ingredients that was supposed to all come together to be this perfect little patty. It worked fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, I used to do mason jar salads, and so the way you would do is you put your dressing on the bottom, then your quinoa, and then you load everything up. But I would make them on a Sunday, but by the time Monday lunchtime hit around, I would turn my thing upside down so that all everything's supposed to the quinoa would then fall into the salad part, and the dressing would leak, but then it would just be like a block of quinoa with the dressing on top, and all the salad ingredients would of course fall to the top of the lid, and I'm shaking it no, come out, and then I have to shake it up and then it break apart and then everything mixes together. But yeah, it was quite the ordeal, but it was good. That was back when I was working in an office years ago. It's been many years since I've worked in a traditional office. Well, technically, but yeah.
You were kind of
well, this past year, last year
that for a little while.
I was in the office almost the whole year, but I mean, it was a lot. I was running a whole building, so I was walking around a building a lot, and especially whenever we were filming, but I spent the first 5-6 months of last year at home because the pandemic shut down and it shut everything down. But then once we got back up and running, I was in an office, but again, if there was a movie going on, I was always off where the set was or walking around and stuff. So I was never really just sitting around per se. But yeah, I don't know. And now I sit at home and it's great for the most part. But before we begin, Caleb,
good morning.
It's very important. You know what I'm going to say. I need you to take off your shirt and show me your back. We're clear? We're clear. Yeah. You can't see why I'm clear. I'm clear.
Yes, we're clear.
Yeah. So I'm really glad we found this movie to watch because we've had some trouble in the past with some of these obscure movies, and they're only rentable, or sometimes they're not even rentable, and it just becomes an ordeal. This movie was rentable, but we did actually find a copy on YouTube, and I'm hoping once we get to a part, I'm not sure if we watched this. I didn't follow your link because I ended up looking it up on my Apple TV. Oh, okay. I'm hoping that there wasn't a part missing out of mine, because there was a really weird, it didn't look like a jump. Everything looked very, continuous. It didn't look like there was weird edits, but a plot point happened where I was like, wait a minute, how the fuck did that happen? And I was very confused. So when we get to that, you'll have to let me know if I missed a scene or something, because it was weird. I was like, wait a minute. No, he was just standing there talking about how did that. So
yeah, there are some. I didn't. I was trying to look up the actors, and all I did was just click on the links for all the characters, so that doesn't help me at all. There are some minor we'll call them inconsistencies throughout this movie. Nothing, not major glaring holes, but like enough that you're like, wait, but really?
Yeah.
And I was very intrigued to see how this would hold up. So I guess this is the point where, before we go any further, we intro the show.
Yeah. So that being said, hello and welcome to the Never Heard of It podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pite.
And I guess I'm a Kavanaugh now.
That's a deep cut. So we're here continuing on with Alien Invasion April, and we are covering a film that actually Caleb, I guess, had seen a while back, and he was like, we have to do this film. So this film is called The Puppet Masters from 1994.
Yeah. Yeah, so The Puppet Masters, like you said, 1994 sci-fi film based on a novel of the same title by Robert A. Heinlein. And we've already gone into how Starship Troopers was super formative for me. And I honestly don't remember which I stumbled into first. I think it was probably this movie, if I'm being honest. I actually... So at some point in my childhood, we ended up with just like boxes and boxes of VHS tapes that we got from somewhere. I don't even remember where anymore. And it's not like it really matters because like nobody listening to this would know anyway. But amongst them was a promotional copy of this sci-fi movie called The Puppet Masters. And when I say promotional copy, I mean that like periodically throughout the movie, it would have that text scroll across the top, like not for resale, promotional copy only.
That's awesome.
Just enough to annoy you if you were like trying to make a quick buck on it, but not enough to make the movie not watchable. And I watched this movie several times because I was just like, this is cool. Young, I guess 13-year-old me, 12, 13 years, whatever, at the time that this would have been released.
Yeah.
Was like this is, it's kind of scary, but kind of cool alien invasion sci-fi movie. And then of course I later read the book, and there's still some parts of that like stick with me. It's been fucking forever since I've read that, and I actually want to reread it. But there's some things that I remember. I'm like, oh yeah, this was really different. So it'll be fun to talk about that. But I haven't seen this movie probably in close to 2 decades at this point. And I was really curious to see how it held up. And honestly, for the most part, it does.
It's not bad. No, like it doesn't feel dated at all. I mean, there's a few things here and there, like when you see computer screens and stuff like that, or like one scene he holds up a floppy disk and you're like, LOL. But other than that, it's pretty good.
Do you remember when a floppy disk could like change the world?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remembered this movie when we were rewatching Save Yourselves, because the poofs move around by shooting out that like tentacle, and they zip around that way and they kill people through that. And in the back of my head, all I could think of was like, this is so much like the Puppet Masters. We should watch the Puppet Masters. And so sat down to rewatch it, and remembering what a like we won't go so far as to say like stellar cast, but like what a packed cast. Like, I mean, almost every person in this movie, and especially for the year that it was released, like these people have all been in like things that you have probably seen at some point or another throughout the years, and especially at this time. And I think half the cast probably was in Law and Order. I'm thinking specifically Sam Anderson is in this, and Richard Belzer is in this.
Yeah, Richard Belzer was in SVU. I mean, he's been in that show for the entire time. Sam was in Criminal Intent. Yeah. So Julie Warner, I mean, has been in tons of different things, and then of course Donald Sutherland, who we'll get into it, but was actually in a movie in the 70s called The Body Snatchers, which is very, very interesting because there are a couple of elements that are borrowed from The Body Snatchers he was in the original one. From this film, there's a few like I don't know if they're like homages. I would assume. I feel like they were probably done as like a, hey, he was the guy in the movie. We did the thing, where they open the mouth and stare at people. There was a few things that I feel like we're directly related to this. So
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And
yeah,
honestly, it could very well also be like just a cycle of influence because the Puppet Masters, the novel, was written in 1951. So you go
right.
like 20 years into the future, and they're making the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It borrows elements from this this subgenre of sci-fi, at least if not
Right.
directly from this story. And then they go 20 years later and make a film of the Puppet Masters, and is borrowing from the precursors in the film genre. And like, it's really cool to see how those elements build on each other over the years.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was like Body Snatchers. There's like 4 different versions of the Body Snatchers. There's Invasion of the Pod People. All of those sort of films. There's a lot of elements to that. And actually, just recently, and a little over a year ago, Doctor Who actually did somewhat of a reference to this in Revolution of the Daleks, and then I think it was called The Time of the Daleks. But basically, what happens is a Dalek gets captured thousands of years ago, gets split apart and buried on Earth, and then it eventually reforms itself. And what it did was it wraps itself around the back of a human,
Mm,
sticking its things inside its brain and making them walk around and do things. So it was
neat.
obviously directly lifted from this plot point, but that happened and that was actually just the New Year's special this past year, Revolution of the Daleks, where
Oh,
that was what happened. So that was a really cool when I saw that I was like, oh shit, they must have I was like he must have the Doctor Who must have got that from Robert Heinlein. That was awesome. And I just noticed we've actually done 3 Robert Heinlein variations,
what was the third?
because we did this, Starship Troopers, and
Uh-huh.
Destination Moon,
Oh
because
yeah,
he wrote Destination Moon. Yeah.
that's right.
Yep.
And I mean, he was super active, especially in like Cold War era, and writing sci-fi, and like so much of that comes out in his writing. And we talked a lot about uh, the influence of the fascist regimes in Europe during World War
Hmm.
II on the like hyper militarized society in Starship Troopers. There in the novel for the Puppet Masters, this is kind of a post Cold War, and like the Soviet superpower has conglomerated itself into this like massive entity, and there are elements that involve them kind of going behind the curtain, so to speak,
Right.
in like in espionage, and like how that lends itself to this plot of these aliens being able to take over human bodies, and like not knowing like who to trust. Add in the element of this real life, we don't know who to trust because anyone could be a spy for the other side. And like there's some really interesting influences on his writing that we still see now, as you mentioned with the latest Doctor Who. We still see these ideas and these plots play out in modern times.
Yeah, it's very cool. And then also, fun fact about the movie version of this. So there's if you look up, there's a lot of writers listed on this, and that's because this film was submitted by multiple screenwriters at different drafts. It just took a while to get the ball rolling. So basically, what happened is someone would submit a script, and they'll be like, "Yeah, sure, we'll buy your script," and then they'll be like, maybe we'll make it," and then maybe a couple months will go by, and they'll be like, yeah, we'll make it, but we got to rewrite this part. So they'll hire another writer. And then they kept doing that, and people kept updating it. And one of the final versions was actually written by David Goyer,
Yeah,
who David Goyer is, very well known. He did Dark City, which I love. Of course, most people know him as the writer for Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, Batman vs Superman, a bunch of other things. But I actually worked with David Goyer. He was the producer of The Night House, which is actually coming out in a couple of months. So
neat.
that's pretty exciting. But yeah, he did the Man of Steel screenplay, the Ghost Rider one. I mean, if you're a fan of writers and you follow producers and stuff like that, like you 100% know David Goyer. Like he's everybody knows David Goyer.
Yeah.
So but yeah, so he was one who submitted a draft for this, and most of the elements from this film are taken from his version of it, which is pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Another kind of just fun tidbit. I messaged you this morning. I was talking about how the NPR weekend show Ask Me Another
Yeah.
did a segment today where they're quizzing people on sci-fi shows that were set in the future that is now the past. And in the back of my head, I was thinking this is probably one of them. I couldn't remember the exact setting, and they never say in the movie. Obviously, we know that their future is very much like the mid 90s because we both lived through everything that minus the aliens, everything that we see on screen we've experienced in real life. But the book was set in the far distant future of 2007.
Hey, talk about the future. Yeah, I just recently, and by just recently I mean every month or so, I watch Demolition Man, and I think that movie is actually set in the nowish times. I think it's sometime right around now. I think it's like 2022 maybe. But there's so many things in Demolition Man that are somewhat true, but a few things were missed.
It's why I appreciate that so much modern sci-fi is very nebulous and like doesn't set a defined time period. They'll say like the distant future, or they won't address the time period at all, because then it allows them to continue to be a bit more timely and less like, man, remember when we thought Unicron was coming in 2005?
Right.
That was a cartoon, so no one actually thought that, but I gotta admit, I was a little disappointed.
You're like, son of a bitch. Yeah, I feel like that's one of those blunders that happened very early in sci-fi, and people didn't really start fixing that until really recently.
Yeah.
Where people started just saying in the near future, in the distant future, not so long from now, or they just literally wouldn't say at all. You just assumed it was some sort of generic future. So like IO, as an example, the episode we just did 2 episodes ago, is a really great example. Is that one, it doesn't really say when, it just says in the future this thing happens, and life is that. We even tried to like figure out what year it was, but we couldn't, because obviously there's no like focal point to jump off of. And I think that's great, because then it excuses any sort of weird technological things and stuff like that, where you're like, well, that's we don't do that anymore.
One of my favorite examples, the 1981 film Escape from New York, was literally filmed outside of my current house. Like,
that's awesome.
That's like that was their vision of a post-apocalyptic New York City, was Midtown St. Louis in the early 80s.
Man, were they wrong.
Yeah.
So the Puppet Masters. So the Puppet Masters starts off, I have to say the very development and introduction in this film is terrible.
Oh yeah,
there is no
lacking.
Like, it is so superficial. Like, we get very generic introduction. So the film starts off with, we see a couple of kids and they're throwing around some metal thing that I guess is supposed to be a frisbee. I don't know why it couldn't just be a frisbee.
I love the kind of visual nod to like, this is a flying saucer story, and the kids are playing with something that looks like a flying saucer. It's it's quirky. It didn't need to be there, but it was fun.
Yeah, and then we see some sort of sky thing happen, and we realize that, oh shit, obviously aliens are coming. And so the kids finally get a hold of local sheriff, who was like, oh kids, you saw a thing, come show me the thing. And they're like, yeah, it's down over here. And just as he walks up, they smash him on the head with a baseball bat and drag him off. And that's how we know that our story's begun. These kids are now possessed by aliens. And then insert our main characters. So right off the bat, we get introduced to Donald Sutherland, who plays Andrew Nivens.
Who plays Donald Sutherland.
Who plays Donald... Yeah, I mean, he's just Donald Sutherland in everything he does.
I think this was actually I may have seen him in something else, but I think this was my real introduction to Donald Sutherland, if I'm being honest. Like, this is what I remember him most for from my childhood.
So I didn't see this movie when it came out. So I mostly remember Donald Sutherland from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 1978 version, because I love that movie. But I also remember Yeah, it was creepy, but I dug it. But I also remember him because my mom really loved MASH, and specifically the movie. I remember watching him in MASH, but then also that, of course, he was in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, so I remember him from that as well.
It's weird though, because like this is the first introduction to him that I can remember.
Right.
He will never be anything but this like vaguely like late middle age, early old man like image in my head. Like I know he had to have been a youth at one point, and I know that he has since gotten significantly older, given that like 25 years have passed since this. But in my head, like he remains forever Dr. Nivens.
No, I mean, same. He's one of those actors, like Sean Connery was a perfect example of that. Like I had an image in my head of what Sean Connery looked like, and then when they started showing pictures of him when he died, of like what he looked like over the past 6 months, I was like, wait, what how did he get this old? I don't understand. Like it was just instant, because he hadn't really done anything in a few years, but I still was watching movies he was in. Like I still watched Indiana Jones, I still watched The Rock, or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So he just looked like that to me because I never saw him as anything else. And then it was just all of a sudden he was old, and I'm sure that's probably how Donald Sutherland is for me now. I mean, because he's got to be in his 80s, right? Like, there's no way. Yeah, he was born in 1935. The dude's 90. Like, yeah. So, like,
and he's still working,
he definitely
too.
Doesn't look like that. Yeah, well, yeah, that's what's crazy.
God damn.
God damn.
God damn. Like, he's done more work, like, in this last, like, decade or so than, like, Eric Tall has done in his entire career. Significantly younger.
With good reason. But so we're introduced to Donald Sutherland, who is the head of the Science and Government Place Division. And I don't know, he has generic NASA science secret title guy.
Yeah, so they work for it's like the Scientific Intelligence Division, which is vaguely associated with the CIA. Again, this all stems out of Cold War intelligence gathering, spycraft sort of stuff. So he's like, we're not supposed to know about this agency because it's so super secretive. So they hint at that. Sam actually says that at one point. And it's kind of like, this is all you need to know. Like, we're a super secretive agency, and like we have the authorization to do everything going forward that we're going to do.
Yeah, so Nivens is sent out to basically investigate this UFO sighting. So apparently this town is blowing up, and everyone's like, oh my God, there is a UFO. The local news ends up reporting on it. And basically what it is that there is essentially an actual spacecraft that the local town is basically basically building around, that they're like, pay $1 to come and see the spacecraft. So this agency, Donald Sutherland's like, hey, pretty much, we probably think half of this is fake, but we think it might be stemming from a real incident. So they actually go. So the idea is that, which I love that they set this whole premise up. Like, they spend a few minutes on this premise and never utilize it at all. He was like, okay, so we're going undercover, and I'm your dad, and Sam and Mary, who is played by Julie Warner, you guys are brother and sister, and like, we're gonna blend in this town and figure out. But it never comes into play ever. Like, it's literally ever.
Again, it's one of those really disappointing things when a novel translates to film, is like that whole idea of them being able to like shift identities on the fly, even go back to, I think if I remember right, like their cars are even the kind where like they push a button and like the license plates change on the fly.
Yeah.
Like they always have, a new identity handy and ready to go. Like there's a lot of that, like a lot more of the espionage aspect in the story, and that was a severely that was a big miss, I think, is what I'm going for here, is that there was a lot more opportunity for that in this film that they didn't really go for.
Yeah, and you know what though? I mean, I see what they were building up, and I can definitely tell that this is probably remnants from a previous draft where they probably tried to integrate into the town a little more, and then discovered things were happening, and it was probably cut for time or for pacing. Because I can see why they would do that, because they do go into this town and they do end up dealing with some of the townspeople, for a minute, and I see where that was definitely left over. And then once the final draft happened, somebody was probably just like, oh shit, like it's on the day that we're filming that, we probably should have taken that scene out. Fuck it, we'll just throw it and keep it
Whoops.
in. Yeah, or it got cut on the floor or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they head off, and Mary is an exoscientist, so her job is to basically, for NASA, determine what extraterrestrials would look like. So she basically works with biology, the idea of their biology and anatomy. So they get to the landing site, and this part, absolutely, like, I feel like this is like kind of like this subtle sexism type thing that they wrote in for a character to make it be like, ooh, she's a strong female, but it just came off as like misogynistic. To be like, well, a guy definitely wrote that, because the thing that tips them off is that as they're going and investigating this UFO thing, after they do it, Mary decides not to go into the UFO thing, because obviously when you walk into this facility, that's where they're slapping the alien on your back and converting you. And she's like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And as she leaves, she was like, yeah, something's up with them. They're not human. And they're like, how do you know? And she was like, because none of them looked down my shirt. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what? Like, either you're crazy stuck up arrogant, or this is just terrible writing. I'm gonna go with the terrible writing based on the rest of your character.
It's not great writing. Ellen was next to me but not paying attention, and she heard part of the explanation. She's like, I'm sorry, they what now? And I was like, all right, so there are like 3 teenage boys here, and she's very obviously like kind of like unbuttoning her top button of her blouse and like leaning over a bit and like touches the shoulder, because she senses that there's something off. She even like,
Right.
they pass a couple people in the woods and they just look like blank-eyed and like totally out of it, and like she senses that something's off there. And so she takes it that step farther by like, you know this kid gave me no attention whatsoever. And she even references like, I'm used to like, she goes to like shake someone's hand, mime that, and she's like, I'm used to a guy like, she mimes them looking her up and down. And Sam is like, really? She's like, yeah, you're still doing it.
Yeah.
And she's making the point like she's used to men being creepy scumbags to her,
Right.
and here she is with 3 teenage boys and a bunch of like countrymen that she hasn't met, and like she's got her blouse unbuttoned a little bit, and like she's looking for a reaction and like getting nothing. So she like plays that up like dramatically, like obviously, and still gets no reaction. And at that point she's like, call it a hunch.
Right. And
it's not great writing, but like you could see what they were going for, but
no,
like,
I get, I mean, it's
a bit of a whiff.
Yeah, and they played it up a lot too. With Sam's characters, when he first meets Mary, he was like, "Oh, well, if my real sister was this good looking, like, are we super cool?" Like he really like lays on the like super creepy. I'm instantly like aggressively sexually hitting on you, and we've met 4 seconds ago. And 1, I'm in front of my dad. 2, like I'm at work. Like 3, there's a possible alien invasion happening, and I'm still like, hey baby, what you packing? I was like, dude, what the fuck?
It's a great introduction to Sam's character, because Sam is something of a sleaze. He's not particularly fun. I mean, you can say that he's a good agent, but like, he is the epitome of like mediocre white guy hero. And like I think that like they do a fairly decent job of demonstrating that like he's not really that great, and he's also a sleaze. And
even the aliens call him out on it. Yes. You should see the stuff in this guy's head.
Yeah.
Like, wow, fuck you. That's gross.
Even the scene, like as they're getting into the car, they've just all finally met at the airport, and they're getting in the car to drive to this small Iowa town. the dad stops him for a moment. He's like, just so we're clear, she is way more important to this mission than you are. And so, you know, Sam is like, all right, so if the shooting starts, like, who am I supposed to take a bullet for? And Donald Sutherland, without missing a beat, well, I would expect you to go for both.
Right.
You are expendable.
Yeah.
Like, they make him the action hero, but they make it very clear, like, he's, you know what, he's just a dime a dozen. Like, we got more of these guys in the trunk.
Right. There was a moment in the film, which we'll get to in a little bit, that I was kind of hoping they would kill him off, and then like she would be the hero of the film, or like Donald Sutherland. But no. So they've basically assessed that, yeah, shit is weird, something's happening, and we need to figure it out. So they essentially, and this is where I feel like they probably would have gone back to the town and gone through their whole alias thing, but it actually just jumps right into the action from here. And I'm actually forgetting what the first encounter. Oh, it's the sheriff, right?
No, the like news director or whatever, the guy who's like the chief of the local news station,
right?
Is they go in to talk to him about the news team had gone on site and reported, like, yes, there was in fact a UFO, and then like 4 hours later, like, oh no, that was a hoax perpetrated by these teenage boys. They built their own spaceship. What do you know?
Wink, wink.
Yeah. And of course, when our team of agents gets to the site, they see that it is just like this jank home built spaceship. But the director, the old man, notices that there are like actual scorch marks on the ground. He's like, something landed here, but it wasn't this. And so they go and they pose as agents from the FCC, which we like. Again, we don't really get a real introduction to that. We just hear him saying something like, we at the FCC don't take kindly to misrepresentation on air.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't think that's true, but
that's not exactly how that works, but especially in 1994, but great.
Yeah. And they're like, are you accusing us of lying on the air, of committing this hoax, of being in on it? And like the director gets like super defensive and then goes for a gun. And then of course they go to tackle him, and Sam shoots him several times, and very like zombie movie style. He doesn't go down. And then eventually the slug disconnects from him and goes whipping around the room.
Yeah. Which, so at this moment, the slug goes whipping around the room, and, they're just like watching it happen. I mean, like, Sam's right there with his gun. Like, I get they want to like capture it alive, and they do eventually capture it alive, but like, they're just like, oh, here it goes. Oh, there it goes. Oh, it's over there now. Oh, it's going there. Well, this is wild to watch. Like, they're like they're watching a cat play with catnip. Like, there's no sense of urgency. And the scene immediately following this also has that same sense of like no sense of urgency. So they, after shooting this thing and capturing it in a briefcase, they electrocute it and they capture it in a briefcase, and they're like, okay, well, hey, thanks a lot, director, we're gonna leave, okay, bye. And they leave the office like pretending they didn't just fucking murder this guy. And as they leave, they notice that a lot of people are aliens, and they all kind of start coming after him. So they hop in their car and they do this getaway drive away. And like the getaway is they're steering all over the place. A guy jumps onto the side, and like grabs on, and they're like fighting him. But everybody's face is the most blasé face. They're just like driving normal, and this guy's like hanging on, trying to capture Mary, and she's like, hey, he's still attached to the car. And he's like, oh,
Donald Sutherland just keeps poking at him
with his cane. Sam, get rid of this guy. Okay. And then like a kid jumps like through the windshield, and they're just kind of like da 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 da. Like there's no like, oh shit, we gotta
Jarvis, help him. And Jarvis is just like,
what should I do? Yeah, everybody is still. It was the weirdest thing.
Just like his best like disinterested expression, like couldn't care less. Like
100%.
Someone could have just been like really just chatting annoying in his ear, just like, fuck this, I'm done. Like that's the level of interest that he had in this kid who had just come flying through the windshield.
Absolutely unreal. So we've gotten our introduction to the first set of aliens. We now know that more than that a lot of people in this town are now possessed or whatever you want to call it. So before we jump into the rest of the film, let's go ahead and take a quick commercial break. First off, for those of you watching on YouTube, we want to thank you very much. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We super appreciate it. They're pretty much new videos. We got like 5-6 new videos every week between us and Fight Jokes About Everything. So definitely check that out. And Fight knows about everything. I traveled backwards in time.
Wow.
And I know it's weird. But also for those of you listening on your podcast player of choice, also don't forget to subscribe. And of course, if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a rating and review. It's super helpful because that'll get us boosted up in the charts, and other people will discover us, and then we can grow and explode and do this for a living, because that would be great.
It would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be pretty cool. So thanks a lot for that, for doing that. If you could, we're going to go to a break and we will be right back.
Looking for something heroic in your life? Go check out our friends at the Superpod HeroCast. They're guys with beers talking about movies with capes. Every episode goes in depth with a different superhero movie. A classic of modern cinema? A certified stinker? It doesn't matter. If it's a superhero movie, they're going to talk about it. Start with a little bit of comedy, add in some film analysis, and finish it off with a heaping dose of geekery. You've got the Superpod HeroCast. It doesn't matter if you're a casual fan or a 20th level nerd. Download their latest episode, grab a beverage, and enjoy the fun. The Superpod HeroCast. Be heroic.
Second Edition 1 is Night Shift Radio's Battlestar Galactica fancast. Each week, Battlestar veterans Caleb and Kitsy revisit, and newcomer to the show, Andrea, watches for the first time the 2004 sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica. They've just entered their third season, which means you've got 2 full seasons of sci-fi gold to binge if you want to watch along with them. Whether you're the commander of a soon-to-be decommissioned battleship, or were recently promoted to president of the 12 colonies. Join Caleb, Kitsy, and Andrea as they make their way through the Battlestar Galactica universe one episode at a time. Watch Battlestar Galactica free on Peacock, and find Second Edition 1 at Second Edition 1 throughout the podcast.com or wherever you get podcasts. Hello and welcome back. So we're talking about the movie The Puppet Masters, which is not The Puppet Master. Completely different movie.
Very different.
Very, very different plot. And the other one's much terrible. So we're talking about this one because we're talking about alien invasions.
Yes,
yeah.
We are.
So when we left it, our crack team of science expeditionary government people have discovered that the tiny town just outside of Des Moines, Iowa, is fucked. They are fucked at this point. Hella fucked. They got bed bugs in their backs. So actually, they kind of look like manta rays.
And so the aliens, as they're originally written, are described more slug-like, and even to the point of being more like soft and gelatinous. Whereas these, they look like you said, more like a ray, and they look kind of like they might have kind of a harder outer skin, or something more equivalent to like a shark skin or something like that. And I find that really interesting because that leads the writing to leave out a lot of fairly major plot points about not only like how the aliens adapt to their surroundings and to like new threats, but like how the agents are always kind of like one step behind. They think they get an advantage, and the aliens adapt, and so they keep having to change up. So we talked earlier about how they would have to show their backs to prove that they weren't being ridden. Well, the humans would start to notice like, oh, the people with like kind of humped or rounded shoulders, and so they would kind of they would target people who looked like that, and the aliens found a way to like ride lower to not look like that. And they were soft skinned, so the humans would kind of like death grip them to kill them. And so the aliens developed a harder shell, and rather than having to like strip down all the time, the humans started developing like armor to like protect their neck and like show that their backs were clear while like not leaving them exposed. And like none of that in this. Like everyone's just walking around in like 3-piece suits all the time and like perfect hiding place.
Yeah, that's what drove me crazy, is because immediately preceding the scene, right when we left a break, they come back and they get to the office, and they're looking at the thing and figuring it out, and Nivens is Donald Sutherland's like, okay, everybody show your back, like we need to to show that you're clear, and so everybody's showing their back, and of course one person eventually has it, but like, for the rest of the movie, why aren't people just like walking around wearing tank tops? Like, why would you not just institute this mandatory dress code of like, hi, we have to see your back at all times so we know? But they were just like, I'm sure it's fine. As you said, keep wearing your suits and your covers and all that stuff.
They barely even required people to like show. Like very rarely did they say,
did it like once.
"Are you clear?" Like lift up your the back of your shirt. Like very rarely did that happen. And like the scene that you're talking about, where they make everyone in the office kind of strip down their shirts to prove it, and the one person like is hesitant, and they're like, "Well, what about you, old man?" So he starts to do it, and then she runs, and Sam chases after her, and ends up alone in the room with her, and like gets the thing off her, but then it cuts away, and then it cuts back, and everyone runs in the room. He's like, damn, it got away, look. And he points to a vent, and like the vent is dented. Like, I was too slow, it got out through there. And like no one says like, hey Sam, like real quick, let's see your back. And you think that might be an
the
important
moment.
plot point. And that's so what you saw was exactly right. Like it does just cut from there to now Sam is like this sleeper agent that's embedded deep with the slugs, and is helping them spread to like the highest points of power in the country. And that's an incredibly important plot point in the story, that they're just like, and this is happening now.
Yeah, it was all of a sudden, it was like, hey, we should have the president come. And you're like, why the fuck is the president? Like, I don't understand. And then Sam's just there, and like, yeah, that was really weird, because I remembered, I obviously, remember the scene of him chasing her and being like, I got away, but I never made that connection. So like, I don't know if like it just didn't click with me, but it was up until the moment later when you realize that Sam is a part of it, and I was like, wait, but when would he have been exposed? Like, but I mean, that was cool, but it didn't feel like a aha, like surprise, oh shit, twist moment. It was more of like a, wait, when the fuck did that even happen? Like, when did that happen? It was really weird.
You did see the scene where he goes to Jarvis's apartment, like gets the super to let him in. And
like, goes to the crate,
opens the crate, and the guy's like, "What is this?" And he, oh my god, Eric Tall's face throughout this movie whenever he does the,
oh, yeah.
Like, what the fuck are you doing with your face, dude?
So that's from the Body Snatchers, is whenever they would, whenever the people that were infected would come across someone who was not infected, they would do that. They would open their mouth really wide. They would point at them and go, oh, like that. And that's how it was like, I'm showing that this person is infected. So like, there's a bunch of famous scenes of Donald Sutherland doing it. But that's that moment. That's that moment of like, they did that, and actually it's funny, as I'm thinking back, there's this made me think of it too, is that there also was a Rick and Morty episode just recently in the most recent season where they had face hugger guys on their face, but they would be on their face, but the face huggers would talk for them and basically use them as the host. So that must have been directly from this. So that's kind of funny too.
Interesting.
There's another reference.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, and he doesn't even make a noise. He's
just oh yeah. And in
his face is all contorted.
Yeah, and the Body Snatchers, they go like, oh, like it's this weird like inward scream thing. Yeah, it's pretty creepy. It was really creepy though. But yeah, so at this point now we know that we've seen that Sam has happened. When does the Richard Belzer thing happen? That happens like before this, right? Because that's before Sam is infected.
Yeah, they're in a briefing talking about the alien that they found, and like starting into discussion with Graves, the other, like basically like their version of like a medical examiner, and
Right.
Mary have started to make some discoveries about it, and the Sam notices that Jarvis isn't smoking, and we see Jarvis several other times, like when he's just kind of standing around, he's always got a cigarette in his hand, and Sam's like, Jarvis, when did you quit smoking? And like that's another tip off that we see throughout the movie, is when someone's like regular routine behaviors changes dramatically and suddenly, and Jarvis like takes off running out of the room. It's his slug that transfers to Miss Haynes that eventually transfers to Sam.
Right. Yeah. And so Dr. Graves is played by Will Patton, and Will Patton you've seen in a bunch of different things. So he was in The Postman, he was in Armageddon, he was in The Mothman Prophecies. He was most recently in Minari, which he was in the Swamp Thing DC Universe show, which is now on HBO Max, I believe. But he's been in tons of things. He's definitely one of those. He's a that guy actor where you're going to see him, you're like, oh, that guy. I know that guy. And then as well as we meet him very shortly is Keith David, who plays Alex Holland. And Keith David, you definitely know his voice, but he was in The Thing. He was in They Live. He was in the movie Pitch Black. He's he's been in so many different things, but a lot of voiceover work. He's been in great stuff, but he's definitely one that you, the minute you see him, like you'll immediately recognize him from tons of different things.
That's why I say, like, this isn't like major star-studded cast, but like you fucking know these people. Like,
well, in 1994 it wasn't,
for the time, this was a really well assembled cast.
Yeah, I would say this is like B-list. In 1994 this was a B-list cast, and you were like, oh yeah, absolutely, pretty good. But yeah, so at this point, now Belzer's basically dead, and what we learn is that once they've been infected, is that the slugs inject into your brain, and that's how they control everything. But they also ramp up your body's adrenaline and your heat. So now they've learned that they can track you via the heat, your heat signature, because you actually end up running around 130 degrees. They also pump up the adrenaline, which makes them faster and stronger. But the other thing is that once the slug leaves, it's almost like an immediate severe like addiction withdrawal. We see Richard Belzer's character, Jarvis, suffering from crazy withdrawal symptoms, and he ends up, just going crazy and overdosing on morphine and killing himself.
So that's another thing that like they make a huge point of. Belzer, Jarvis, and the Miss Haynes character, and like a couple other people are like, oh, it's like they're experiencing like withdrawal, and they're like, oh, why would that be? They're like, well, imagine having this giant brain 1 second, because we learned the slugs are basically all brain. Imagine having this giant brain 1 second and like not the next. What would you do? Like they make a huge deal out of it, and then anyone else that they disconnect, they either like are just like fine, they're kind of like tired and like out of it, or like they just kind of breeze over and skip that entirely, and so it's like it's never a thing, and like it didn't have to be a plot point at all. Basically only served to give us a chance to see Jarvis vent air into his veins and give himself the bends.
Right. Yeah, it was really weird. That was probably another one of those things that probably was carried on. We see a little bit of it with Sam later. So after Sam's, they essentially, after Sam's plot to try to like take over the president, he's captured. They're basically interrogating the alien, and this is where we get the moment where the alien is speaking through Sam and saying things like, "Oh, Mary, you don't know the fantasies this guy has about you. Do you want me to tell you?" And I was like, what the like, is this necessary?
Nope.
He's Nivens is there, interrogating his own son, because it is his real son. And he's there interrogating him, and they're like, you won't do it because he's your son. And of course, Nivens is like, yeah, electrocute him again. You know, he was like, I will. Like, I don't give a fuck.
It's
So
like the alien can see and like has access to all of Sam's memories and all of his emotions and whatnot, and like doesn't realize that like the old man is known for being kind of callous and would
right.
absolutely sacrifice his son if he thought for the it would be for the good of the mission.
Well, he even says later, like, there's a moment at the end where he was like, I can't believe you did it. And he was like, well, Dad, what would you have done? He was like, I would have shot you. You
Yeah,
know, like he
yeah.
says it flat out. He'd be like, yeah, I would have fucking killed you. You know, like, and he even when he captured him, like they were like, he was like, fine, I'll fucking kill him if I have to. Like he was ready to kill his son to get the information he need and or kill this thing so it doesn't spread.
Mm-hmm.
But instead they keep it and put it on a bunch of chimpanzees because why not? I feel like that was a really weirdly popular thing in the 90s, was like showing chimpanzees being experimented on or like having them in facilities. And I know it was because it was a very hot button topic in real life at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
during the 90s, where people were discovering that they were, you know, doing animal testing and stuff like that. But it was a really weird trend.
Yeah, and I think that there was it's been long enough that I don't remember for sure. I know that this plot point of like learning how the slugs reproduce was in the novel. And I think that it had something to do with they were trying on different animals to see how they would react. But yeah, it feels weird now to see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was very disconcerting, even though, you know, it was very apparent that the chimpanzees weren't actually being, I mean, they were just walking around a room. But you know, we get this moment of learning that the aliens outside of a host body, you know, or if they jump to another body, they still remember and keep track of everything that they had. So basically, once they've collected that information, they have it. And you know, we learn in a previous scene, which I thought was really cool, and I wish they would have kind of built on this a little more, is so Nivens is interrogating him and asking him all these questions, and of course, you know, the alien's playing coy. But then at one point he says, how many of you are there?
Mm-hmm.
And the alien is just like, I am one. Like, and you know, it kept getting frustrating, and you could see that it was like, I don't understand, you know. And it eventually, like, Sam, they kind of electrocute it, and Sam like breaks through, and he was like, the alien doesn't understand what you mean by how many are there, because they're a hive mind. They all think the same thing. And we learn that they communicate two different ways. So one is they have these extra set of tentacles that come out that kind of look like hands, and they do a little handhold, and that's how they exchange their information. But also we learn that there is a central base that essentially they go and info dump, and once they do that, it spreads back out to the rest of the colony. So they're learning, they now know everything from everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that comes in. So I thought that was a really cool thing of like, he doesn't understand what you mean by how many.
Which again, it really highlights the missed opportunities in like being able to demonstrate the way that the aliens learn and adapt throughout the story. Because if they're info dumping, like you said, that's a great term for it, and if they're just all ending up with the same information once they get back together, then sooner or later one of them is going to be like, oh, they learned how to recognize that we're heightening body temperature, we should be better about regulating that. And another one's going to be like, oh, they realized how easy we are to kill with the X method, and like we should adapt to that. And like just completely like miss that entirely. Again, just a whiff.
Yeah, they kind of they like sort of bring it up later in the movie, but it's very much like oh, okay, well, you know, we got to get the aliens. Anyone could be an alien. Yeah, no, I noticed that they lowered their body temperature now, so that's a thing. Anyway, so okay, here we're gonna do. You know, it's like, wait, no, stop. That sounds really important. You should go back and talk about that a little more.
Yeah.
So Sam's been undone, and we see that he's having a little psychological break about this. You know, and he has this little freak out moment in the shower, and you know, Mary comes to his rescue, and she was like, hey, you know, what's going on? Oh, content warning. There's like one instance where somebody drops an F-bomb, and we do see Sam's butt. And that's about it.
Yeah, some man ass.
And so Mary, you know, comes in and was like, oh my God, like, Sam, it's okay. She takes him back to his apartment and immediately starts hitting on him, and and he was like, whoa, okay, let's do this. And he keeps trying to put his hands around her, and she keeps pushing his hands down, and then she says, like, don't move. And she goes to take off her shirt, and of course, I feel like Sam should have instantly picked up on this, and I feel like he didn't, but she was being really obvious.
Yeah.
And especially having just had one on your back, I feel like you should be like in that mindset. But then again, as you mentioned, mediocre hero.
This is where we get another important plot point that is just kind of breezed over. They meet Sam's cat, who like runs out the window. She's like, "Is it okay for him to be out there?" "Oh yeah, he's fine. He'll come back when he wants to." Blah, blah, blah. Does that all the time. And then he mentions like, "Oh, he's something of a prima donna. He doesn't really like people." And then he leaves the room and comes back, and she's holding him, and she's like, "Look who turned out to be a sweetie after all." And like, again, like, the animal was out there, came back, something's off. And
right.
we totally breeze over the fact that like it gets mentioned once and never again that the slug was able to attach to the cat and then transfer to Mary from that. So like they're jumping cross species, they're learning. And yeah. Also, this scene was a very confusing thing for young Caleb, because I did have a crush on Julie Warner, and she's standing there in just her underwear, but also has the slug on her back, and I was like, this is not until Species came out would I be like more conflicted about
that would be reddit.com/r/confusedboner. That would be that whole thing right there. Yeah.
So yeah.
And well, so the scene is also really weird, is because again, Sam doesn't notice it right off the bat, which I feel like was just like such a huge blunder. But also, so they're still in Des Moines, Iowa.
No,
right?
They're in DC.
They're back in DC
it's
now?
mentioned,
okay.
But it's not really like made clear. They leave Iowa entirely and go back to DC.
Yeah, but then they have to go back to Iowa anyways, because they have to go back to the Little River thing, and that's where the end of the movie takes place.
Yeah, they keep sending like military forces in, and like the military keeps getting overrun. So the final thing is to like, okay, we'll just send Holland and Salmon alone to the hive, because Mary had took off, and she's
right.
She now needs to be rescued. And Sam, knowing that not only is she more important than him, made clear by his father, but also him now having a fling with her, he's like, I have to save her. I must.
I have to do it.
I'm the worst equipped for any mission, but I must be the one to save her.
LOL. Yeah, so at this point, the military gets involved. They find out that they send all these guys in, and of course, instantly they all get turned into aliens, because fucking why? And so it's like, well, that fucking sucks. Like your whole, base thing. And this is where Sam starts like relaying the information of like when we connected, I got part of their info. And he says like, look, it looks like they have these things. They're traveling near water. We looked for heightened areas of, temperature, and we discovered that this is where their home base is or whatever. So they launched this big thing to go there and stop the alien info dump, and they're like, this is where the mothership is or whatever. And so they get there, and the doctor's like, oh wait, hang on, here's this thing. If you carry it on you, it emits this frequency, and as long as you don't get too close, they'll think you're one of them, and they'll just kind of ignore you. Like, cool, that's another bit of technology that you just sort of like instant solve, instead of like, hey, we should exposition that. They just was like, let's solve this plot hole with this blinky device, I guess.
Thank God for Graves.
Right.
Probably shouldn't have made that joke about him wanting to fuck the alien earlier. Sorry about that, buddy.
I know, that was also a really awkward I was like, I don't understand the point of this scene. Or the one before, because it's like you're having an alien invasion. Like, now is not the time for joking, and you keep making these really weird, like, inappropriate jokes. But anyways, so so they finally get to the mothership, and Sam goes in there, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna rescue Mary, be like, we have to save these people. Meanwhile, they gun down about 30 of them.
Oh my god, they don't
He
even
was like, we have
try.
to save everybody. He's just like, just kills like half of them, just annihilates half of this town. And Sam saves the day, but weird. Nivens, Dr. Nivens, has to go in, and he just wants to take, or head of Nivens or whatever, has to
The old
go
man.
in. The old man. I hate it because it makes me think of Adama the whole time. But so he goes and he's like, I have to go and take a look at this place. And he has a little stumble. Oh, that's weird. And then he gets up and he's like, oh no, I'm fine. All right, I'm gonna head back to DC or whatever. And he starts walking away, and someone's like, oh hey, your dad forgot his cane. And Sam's like, oh no. And of course he goes running after him. We have our big helicopter moment, and this is where we get the moment where Sam he shoots his dad. I mean, obviously just like in the arm or whatever. But and then he was like, and his dad was like, oh, I can't believe you did it. And he's like, well, what would you have done? He's like, I would have shot you. He's like, and we saved the day. And they all helicoptered off into the sunset.
Well, it's like a little bit of a twist on the what you always call the mothership theory. Like they learn, they've tried all of these things to kill the slugs, but they like always kill the host in the process. That was part of the chimp experimentation that we thankfully didn't have to see. And they find this kid in the hive that is alive, but his slug is dead. And so they bring him back, and turns out he's got a case of encephalitis. And they're like, oh, well, of course, because that affects the brain, and the slugs are all brain. And they're like, well, all we got to do is get people, like get mosquitoes out there, and like get people close to each other, and then it'll spread like wildfire and kill them all. And like super convenient. Okay, they're all dead now, except for the one that gets on the old man. Another thing that's kind of a missed opportunity is, of course, Heinlein was big on this kind of thing. Like they get an expedition together, and they go back to Titan, where the slugs are from, to fucking take them out like on their own territory. Like this is just like, happily ever after. Sam and Mary get to bone now.
Yep. Yeah. Without slugs. That was another thing that was included. The director confirmed later that just because just like in the novel, they are in fact from Titan, but we do not ever learn where they're from. We don't really learn we know what their goal is just basically to infest and breed, but we don't really learn the why outside of just like its instinct.
They say something to the effect of like, our old hosts outlived their usefulness, and your bodies are stronger. So we get the sense that like they're colonizing, looking for new and stronger hosts, and like maybe they wrecked Titan by like overbreeding and like abusing their hosts or something like that.
Yeah, so we never really get an explanation, which is fine actually. I mean, this is another thing that like it was also really great during Save Yourselves, is we never really learn why the aliens are there. We never really learn about the aliens per se, and I feel like that was a cool addition. I mean, we do learn physiologically about the aliens. This is one of the things that the writers about Save Yourself said, like there's always some asshole scientist who just knows the answer and figures it all out, and it it gets weird. But in this case, we have that asshole scientist, but we don't ever really learn the backstory of the aliens. We never really learn why they're here to do what they're doing. We just know that they do, which is kind of cool. Same thing with Body Snatchers. You never really learn, you just sort of know that that's what they're after. Yeah. So the Puppet Masters is available streaming for rent on all services. It's like anywhere between $3 and $5, anywhere from Apple to Amazon and Google and stuff like that. And of course, if you are an intrepid internet explorer, you may find it streaming for free somewhere on a site like YouTube. But of course, we don't condone things like that. Wink, wink. But yeah. So should you watch this movie? Totally. I think this is a great alien invasion movie.
Yeah. Like we've spent just a little over an hour now picking it apart, but honestly, this held up to what I remembered of this story, and It is not, by far not without its flaws, but for for the time that it was written, and the cast and everything, like it holds up fairly well. It's a decent action movie, and it's a good chance to see a mediocre action hero stumble a lot.
Yes, precisely. So thanks a lot for joining us, everyone. Of course, as we mentioned before, don't forget to subscribe, but hit us up on social media. You can actually hit us up on the Night Shift Radio social media account, which is Media NSR. So MEDIA NSR, on both, on Twitter, and on Instagram, it's Night Shift Radio Media. So reach out to us, let us know, what you liked, recommend another movie. But of course, if you wanted to do that more formally, Caleb, how could they do that?
Well, over on thenahoits.com, which is conveniently linked right off the nightshiftradio.com website if you'd rather start there, which I wouldn't be offended. You can find, of course, our upcoming list of episodes and links to trailers and where you can find them streaming if available. So if you're like, wait, where did they say this movie was? I want to watch it. You can go right there and check it out. But just below that is a contact form where we give you the opportunity to reach out to us and say, hey, watch this movie, you dumbasses. And we're like, fuck it, why not?
Of course, why would we not? I'm down. I'll watch any movie, especially if you preface it with dumbass.
Here's a recommendation, you chuckle fucks.
Brilliant. So thanks a lot for joining us, everyone, and we will see you on the next one.